in this particular case, at about 10:08 in the morning, an individual called our central dispatch and said that a person that had a PPO against them was breaking into the home. The person breaking into the home's name was Galen Gavitt, Galen Gavitt. And he had previously made threats that he was going to kill his ex-girlfriend. They had actually been living together for nearly 17 years in a different county. She had sought refuge at her daughter's house, or stepdaughter's house, which was in Orion. So they were living in Tuscola County, and because of a concern about his behavior and threatening behavior, she came and was living at her stepdaughter's house here in Oakland County in Orion Township. She sought a PPO and got a PPO against him. So there was a valid PPO in place. He's breaking into the house, used an axe to break into a window to gain entry into the basement. The stepson, I'm trying to put together the relationships with all the different people. The stepson and the girlfriend who fled from him went to an upstairs bedroom to barricade themselves in. The woman that had obtained the PPO went into the bathroom to further barricade herself, and the stepson leaned against the door, armed himself, but leaned against the door to keep anyone else from getting in. The suspect fired a shot through the door, at which point the stepson went down to take cover. Suspect came into the room, pointed a weapon directly at the stepson on the ground, basically saying, "I'm here for her," and moved towards the bathroom door. And at that point, the stepson fired one round from his weapon, which struck the assaulting suspect, which is down deceased. So kind of played out very quickly, but I kind of wanted to lay it out because a lot of moving parts and relationships. So to take it back a little further, on 6/12, she obtained a PPO against the suspect, who I've identified for you, Galen Gavitt, who's 67 years old. She obtained a PPO, and with the facts contained in that PPO, our Orion Township substation then obtained a ERPO, an extreme risk protection order under the recently enacted law. Tuscola County on 6/12 executed that ERPO and took two weapons from that individual into custody, into protective custody. So that leaves you wondering, how did he get a weapon? It's obviously still very early and preliminary, but it appears he somehow got his ex-wife's weapon and took that to the house to go shoot his living girlfriend, former living girlfriend. So kind of a lot of details there, but otherwise I'm not sure any of us would be able to follow how this all played out. So there was an ERPO in place against him and a PPO in place against him. And yet it appears, like as I said at this point, somehow he obtained a firearm from his former wife, and that was what he fired through the door and brought to the home. I think that's the basic rundown. At this point, there's no injuries to the two victims, the stepson and the individual woman that, had the PPO. They're doing fine. They're obviously being communicated and cared for by our substation deputies at this point. And it's still very much obviously an ongoing investigation to figure out some of those moving parts as it relates to how he came into possession of someone else's firearm, et cetera. Questions?
Can you spell his name again, the suspect?
Yep. First is Galen, Galen. Last Gavitt, G as in George, Avitt.
V as in Victor or B as in boy?
V as in Victor. Gavitt.
Could you spell it one more time? G-A-V?
Gavitt.
Thank you.
Do you know what kind of weapon he had? What style of weapon that was?
He had, it looks to be a Luger 38 revolver.
Can you say how many shots were fired from that gun?
Preliminarily, he fired one shot, and the person, defending the home fired one shot.
Why is it so difficult sometimes for people to get personal protection orders? It's understandable if there's an extreme risk involved, but sometimes when you file a PPO, you have to demonstrate at least two acts, separate acts of threatening behavior from someone. Why is it that there has to be two? Because one can be just one and done. I think that is a fair to ask question. I'm not disputing it's a fair question, but that would be up to the court to make a determination. In this case, the PPO came first, and then it was followed on by the ERPO. So there was no hiccup in her getting a PPO in this particular case. As to other cases where it needs to, I guess you'd have to ask the issuing authority, what was their determination?
So
yes.
What are the penalties for someone, I'm speculating, providing a firearm to someone who's under this ERPA rule, who's, their guns have already been removed, and if it was voluntarily
I'm not honestly sure. I'd have to read that statute. I don't know that that has happened yet, so I don't know what the penalties are for that happening.
And it's unclear whether she gave it to him, the ex-wife gave him that.
All we know is that he had an ex-wife's weapon. We don't know how he came into possession of that at this point.
Sheriff, ex-wife in the same area people are coming from, you mentioned?
From Tuscola as well, yeah.
And then can you describe that, not the PPO, but the second, the statute you just mentioned, describe that again for us? The
Extreme Risk Protection Order, which an acronym is an ERPO, was enacted by the legislature for situations where there's a potential belief that has to go to a judge to make a determination that that person can be a danger to themselves or others. And weapons can be removed from that situation as an intermediary step, basically.
So they got this, judge approved it, and his weapons, if he had them, were taken by the local sheriff?
Yes.
Red flag laws, commonly referred to as red flag laws. Do we know if Mr. Gavitt, before the PPO, was licensed to carry?
Still very early.
Did he have a criminal background at all that you're aware of?
I don't know any of that. They're still, at the scene, so we haven't really dug very deep into his background yet.
And do you feel comfortable disclosing the age of the female victim, just the age?
62.
And stepson, rough age?
36.
Thank you.
And no one else was in the house at the time?
No.
Was a stepson had a CPL or something like that? He was legally had that weapon that he used.
Well, inside a home, you have a right to defend yourself. So if that weapon was in the home owned by someone else or whatever the case may be, you don't need a CPL in your own home.
And have you determined that the stepson acted within the bounds of the law already, or are you still investigating and that's an open question?
Well, the investigation's ongoing preliminarily. It certainly appears he had been shot at through the door and saw him on the way to go after his stepmother with a gun that he'd already fired. So it sure looks to be very much justified.
When you were describing that, Sheriff, leaning up against the door for protection, I was anticipating you saying he was going to fire through the door. How did he not get hit?
Grace of God, it depends on where in the door it went through. If he was leaning against the door, the shot, I guess I'd have to look at the door and what part, how low he was leaning, but he was apparently bracing the door to prevent someone from coming in. And then the shot came through the door, which obviously was a revelation and very startling, and he fell down to the ground. And that's when the suspect opened the door, pointed the weapon directly at him.
Was there any communication via cell phone or anything like that to the living girlfriend prior to that? Because that would ultimately be a violation of the PPO within itself if it was checked.
I don't have any information that the PPO had been violated prior to that. That's going to be part of this investigation.
You may or may not be able to speak to this at this point, but obviously red flag laws, extreme risk protection orders, this is new in our state. And you didn't execute the ERPO, but
we obtained it.
You did obtain it.
Yes, and since it was in a different jurisdictional venue, we requested their assistance, and they did in fact serve it and seize 2 weapons.
How often is this coming up now since the law has been passed? How many incidents have involved these so-called ERPOs or red flag laws in which you're seizing weapons in the county?
I wouldn't say it's commonplace, but we've used it a number of times. You know, we could probably research and get you an exact number, but
I think since the law has passed, this is the first time we've maybe had a press conference with you in which an ERPO was executed that I'm aware of.
Yeah, it's the first one that I'm aware of in the state where there was a PPO and an ERPO in place, and yet we still ended up with a shooting.
You know, with these PPOs and the red flag laws, including ERPA, aren't those entered into the lien system for law enforcement, so they're all widely shared?
Yep.
Anything else you want to say just about domestic violence? And obviously it's a tragic situation, no matter how you spin it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a terrible situation anytime there's a loss of life, but I guess my off-the-cuff reaction is that, you know, the person that came there to perpetrate violence, thank God, was the only person that ended up being hurt, and in this case, killed by the violence they sought to wreak. I mean, there's never a good outcome, but if you're going to have a better outcome than having 3 people dead at this point, because oftentimes what you see is they kill everyone there and then kill themselves. So, you know, all of us have been to countless murder-suicides. And it would not surprise me at all if that's what was on his mind.
And do we know if Mr. Gavitt had ever physically harmed this 62-year-old victim?
He had apparently had behavior that was threatening, including with a firearm, and that was part of the obtainment of the PPO and ultimately the ERPO.
You said he was 66?
He was 67.
Okay.
Sheriff, are you able to tell us how long he was in the home before, getting upstairs and then firing that shot into the bathroom?
They're still working on specific timelines, but it pretty much sounds like from the calls, from the first call in to this call at the point where they said that, you know, I fired a shot, then the suspect is down, was just about or around 3 minutes is all. Fairly short, fairly quick.
And what was the timeline between when she left the Tuscola home and moved to Orion? Was it days, weeks, months?
All I can tell you is that, you know, she got the PPO in June on the 12th. I don't know when she moved there.
When's the most dangerous time for a person who's experiencing domestic violence to escape? What's the most critical window for them?
I don't know that I could characterize the most critical window for someone that is trying to get out of an abusive, violent relationship. I think any time is. It can escalate obviously very quickly, and sometimes when you're first making that move, that can be certainly very dangerous when you're trying to leave. And then when the PPOs serve, sometimes that's a flashpoint. But obviously now we're a month later, so month plus. So they weren't the most dangerous time in this situation, but they tend to be in the others that we've seen.
Is there any, sorry, go ahead.
Would you say typically victims who are in abusive relationships, they're men or women, they're afraid to even say that they are being abused because their abuser might even overhear that and then, you know, either kill them, severely hurt them? Do you think that, you know, people who, that is the reason why they're so scared to try to get out or even try to plan their way out of something like that and even scared to go to law enforcement?
Yeah, they're terrified on many levels, and it depends on their situation. Like if they have kids, there's a whole other layer of fear. How do I get the kids with me? What does that mean for, you know, maybe they don't have a job themselves, and what does that mean for what happens to us and our kids? And so there's a lot of layers that go into that fear when someone's being abused, being threatened, and, you know, just know that we're encouraging people that are in that situation to get out as quickly as they can and seek the support of, you know, both law enforcement and public service agencies, counseling, et cetera.
And what about, you know, the third party, family members or anything like that, that could also be, you know, involved in that typical abuse of that particular spouse, girlfriend, boyfriend, husband, wife? That third party, they could be, you know, harassing someone during the court hearings or the PPO proceedings, or they could even be harassing them as well against, and so, I mean, they have multiple layers of fears. That
I would add that into your PPO document and, you know, add them as another person that you want no contact from. And going back to your other question, we're blessed to have here in Oakland County an agency called Haven. And actually, at one point, I sat on their board many, many years ago. If you're in that situation and you're not sure what steps or timelines on your steps, find a moment when you can get to a phone alone outside of anyone else's hearing and call them. You know, they're experts in this, and they have helped extricate many, you know, women and children and men from an abusive, violent relationship. And they certainly can give you some suggestions and advice, and that may obviously include looping in law enforcement, but they can give you reassurance. There's hope, and there's a path, and there's a place for you to go. Even if you don't know where that's going to be, we're here now, and we'll help you. And then we'll figure it out together. And that's why it's such an amazing organization. They can kind of fill that void of, where do I go if I leave? What do I do? Who do I talk to? Where do I get help? And I think having Haven and a law enforcement agency work hand in hand is a very good path.
Are you sure this is Orion Township, not Lake Orion?
Orion Township.
Sure, if we had cut into our live stream, for our viewers, could you recap just the first couple of minutes there of what had happened?
Yes, so an individual that had an existing PPO and an ERPO against him in place came to the home where one of our victims was staying to be away from him, broke into the home, utilizing an axe and coming in a basement window. And the victim who obtained the PPO was there with her stepson. They went upstairs into a bedroom and barricaded themselves into the bedroom and called 911. The suspect proceeded up to the second story, tried to get into the bedroom, found that the stepson was holding the door closed, so the suspect fired a shot through the door, at which point the stepson fell to the ground, and the suspect came through the door now, pointed a firearm directly at the stepson and said, "I'm here," basically, not the exact words, but "I'm here for her," and then was proceeding towards the bathroom where she had gone. And the stepson fired one round, which ended the situation.
Can you say roughly where that shot that was fired, where that hit the suspect?
Where did it hit him?
Yeah,
It appeared it hit him in the head.
Oh, in the head.
Okay, everybody good?
Yeah.
All righty.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, I'll just add one thing, he just found this. An individual, you wanna go back here?
Yes, please.
Oh, hold on. An individual who knowingly places a firearm in the possession of an individual who is restrained under an ERPO is guilty of a felony punishable by imprisonment not more than 1 year or fine and not more than 1,000 or both.
Can you repeat that? I'm so sorry. Yeah.
An individual who knowingly places a firearm in the possession of an individual who is restrained under an extreme risk protection order is guilty of a felony punishable by imprisonment not more than 1 year or a fine of not more than 1,000 or both.
But to be clear, you're not certain if the wife knew about the.
Again, we don't know how he came into possession of that weapon, and that's part of the obvious investigation. But that question was asked, and now we know the specific penalty from quick research.